The cold was a constant companion. It lived in the stone floors of the scullery, crept through the cracks in the walls, and settled deep in her bones. Alara pressed the back of her hand against her cheek, a futile attempt to chase away the chill. The skin was rough, chapped raw from lye soap and icy water. But it was the other mark on that hand that defined her. A brand. A circle with a line struck through it, seared into her flesh years ago. The mark of the soulless. A brand given to those deemed empty, a danger to the pack, a vessel for blight. She had been 10 years old. Now, at 19, the physical sting had long faded. The other pain, the one that lived behind her ribs, was a different matter entirely. It was a hollow ache that echoed the symbol on her skin. "Girl!" Mistress Greta's voice was a whip crack in the damp air. "The floors are not going to scrub themselves. Is your mind as empty as your soul?" Ilara flinched, pulling her hand away from her face and dipping the stiff brush back into the bucket of frigid, murky water. "No, mistress." The words were a whisper, swallowed by the cavernous kitchen. She scrubbed, her shoulders screaming in protest. Every day was the same. The pre-dawn chill, the endless list of chores, the casual cruelty that clung to the air like grease. She was a ghost in her own life, visible only when someone needed a target for their scorn. Her gaze drifted to the small, crusty window overlooking the village square. Snow was falling again, thick white flakes blanketing the world in a deceptive purity. It made the northern Fangpack lands beautiful, but it was a merciless beauty. A beauty that could kill. She was an outcast, permitted to live within the village walls only because the pack's alpha had decreed that none should be cast out into the frozen wastes, no matter their crime. Or, in her case, their perceived lack of a soul. Lord Valerius, the elder who governed this remote outpost, had been the one to press the branding iron to her hand. He had looked at her with eyes like chips of slate and declared her a void, a threat. She had never understood why. She felt things. She felt the cold. She felt the hunger that gnawed at her belly. She felt the sharp sting of a slap and the dull throb of a bruise. And she felt the fierce, protective ache for little Lyra, the cook's daughter, who coughed through the nights with a fever that wouldn't break. Ilara finished the floor, her knuckles scraped and bleeding. She moved on to the next task, hauling firewood for the great hall. The wood was heavy, the splinters sharp against her palms. No one offered to help. To touch her was to risk contamination, or so the whispers went. They called her blight-touched. Empty. A shell. But they didn't know that she saved a portion of her meager meal each night, slipping it to Lyra when the cook wasn't looking. They didn't know she stole moments to sit by the girl's cot, humming tuneless lullabies until the child's ragged breaths evened out. That was her secret. A secret act of love in a life defined by its absence. As she stacked the logs by the hearth, a commotion erupted in the square. Shouts, the thud of hooves on packed snow. It was unusual. Visitors were rare this deep into the winter. Mistress Greta bustled past, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and fear. "The Alpha King, he is here. Make yourself scarce, girl. We'll not have your ill omen fouling his sight." The Alpha King, Kael. The name was a legend, a myth whispered by the fire, the ruler of all the shifter packs, a being of immense power, ancient and cold as the glaciers from which he took his name. They said he had not been seen in these outer territories in a century. Ilara shrank back into the shadows of the hall, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She wanted to be invisible, to melt into the stone. The last thing she wanted was to draw the attention of any alpha, let alone the king. But a sliver of her, a foolish, desperate part, peered around a stone pillar. She saw him then. He dismounted from a massive black warhorse that seemed carved from shadow and obsidian. He was impossibly tall, broad-shouldered in a cloak of dark fur and leather. Snowflakes vanished before they could touch him, melting in an unseen aura of power. Lord Valerius was already bowing, his usual arrogance replaced with a sycophantic terror that Alara found grimly satisfying. "Your Majesty," Valerius stammered, "an unexpected honor." The king did not reply. His head turned, his gaze sweeping over the assembled villagers. Alara felt the weight of that gaze even from her hiding place. It was like the pressure before a storm. His face was harsh, beautiful in the way of a northern winter, all sharp angles and unyielding strength. His hair was black as a raven's wing. His eyes, she could not see their color from this distance, only that they seemed to hold a pale, unnerving light. He radiated a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a deep, profound chill, an absence of heat that made the winter air feel balmy by comparison. Alara shivered, wrapping her thin arms around herself. This was the man who held her life, and the lives of everyone here, in the palm of his hand. And he looked as if he could crush it all without a second thought. Suddenly, a scream cut through the tense silence. It came from the kitchens. Fire. Black smoke billowed from the small window Ilara had been looking through just moments before. Flames licked at the thatched eaves. Panic erupted. "Lyra!" The cook's shriek was pure agony. "My daughter is in there!" Villagers ran, but not toward the fire. They ran for buckets, for help, their movements clumsy with fear. Ilara didn't think. She didn't weigh the risks or remember her place. She only heard that scream and thought of the small, feverish girl in the back room. She ran. She burst through the kitchen door into a wall of heat and smoke. It was a dragon's breath, stealing the air from her lungs. "Lyra!" she choked out, her eyes streaming. A weak cough answered her. Through the swirling blackness she saw the little girl, huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. The main exit was blocked by a fallen, burning beam. Ilara scrambled over overturned tables, the heat blistering her skin. "I'm here, I have you." She reached Lyra, scooping the small, frail body into her arms. The child was terrifyingly light. The smoke was thicker now, a choking blanket. Ilara turned, searching for another way out, but the flames were everywhere. Her lungs burned. Black spots danced in her vision. She sank to her knees, shielding Lyra with her own body. The heat was immense, searing. "This is it," she thought, a strange sense of calm settling over her. At least I wasn't empty. The roar of the fire was deafening, but through it, she heard another sound. The splintering of a door frame being torn from its hinges. A figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the snow-lit square. A giant wreathed in smoke and fury. It was him, the Alpha King. He moved with a speed that was not human. He strode through the inferno as if it were a mild spring rain. The flames seemed to shrink back from his presence, to shy away from the absolute zero he embodied. His eyes found her. Pale, silver eyes, glowing with a light that cut through the smoke. They held no warmth, only a terrifying intensity. He bypassed the panicked cook, the shouting villagers, Lord Valerius, who was barking useless orders. He came directly to her. He did not speak. He knelt, and the immense cold that rolled off him was a momentary, shocking relief from the fire. He reached for her. His hands were encased in black leather gauntlets, but she felt the chill through them, a cold so deep it felt like it went to the bone. She flinched, expecting a blow, a rough dismissal. Instead, his hands were impossibly gentle. One slid beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees. He lifted her, and Lyra, as if they weighed nothing. Ilara's head fell back against his chest. It was like leaning against a mountain of ice. Through the thick fur of his cloak, she felt no body heat. None at all. The world tilted, the smoke-filled room giving way to the gray sky and falling snow. Gasps rippled through the crowd of onlookers. The Alpha King, the untouchable, merciless ruler, was carrying the soulless girl. Her branded hand was pressed against his chest. She felt a strange something, a flicker, not of heat, but of energy. A thrumming deep within him that met a corresponding flicker deep within her. What was that? His silver eyes were fixed on her face. He read the confusion, the terror there. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold granite. But his hold on her was firm, secure, protective. Lord Valerius pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of outrage. "Your Majesty, what are you doing? That thing is a blight. She is soulless. She probably started the fire herself." The king's gaze shifted to Valerius. The temperature seemed to drop another 20 degrees. The air crackled. "I was addressing my future queen." Kale's voice was a low growl, deep as thunder but soft as snowfall. It silenced the entire village. Ilara's vision swam. The smoke, the shock, the words. It was too much. Future queen? It was a mistake. A cruel joke. He had to be mad. She saw the cook rush forward and gently take Lyra from her arms, whispering frantic thanks. Then there was only Ilara, held against the frozen heart of a king. "I will take this one," he said, his voice quiet now, meant only for the men of his personal guard who had materialized at his side. It was not a request, it was a statement of absolute ownership. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the pure, murderous hatred in Lord Valerius's eyes, and the impossible sight of frost forming on the hilt of the king's sword in the middle of a fire. She woke to the scent of clean linen and dried herbs. For a moment she thought she was dead. The feeling was so alien. Softness, warmth, peace. But then the ache in her lungs returned, a raw scrape with every breath, and she knew this was no afterlife. She was lying in a bed, a real bed, with thick fur blankets and a mattress that felt like a cloud. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth nearby, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. It was a chamber fit for a queen, larger than the entire hovel she had shared with 3 other servants. Panic seized her. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning. Where was she? The events of the fire came rushing back. Lyra, the smoke, the king, his impossible words, future queen. She looked down at herself. Her ragged, soot-stained tunic was gone. In its place was a simple, soft chemise of white wool. Someone had cleaned her, tended to her. Her branded hand lay on top of the furs, the ugly mark a stark contrast to the pristine white bedding. "You are awake." The voice came from the shadows in the corner of the room. He stepped forward into the firelight, and her breath caught in her throat. The Alpha King, Kale. He was without his heavy cloak, dressed in a simple black tunic and trousers that did nothing to hide the sheer power in his frame. He was a predator in repose, every line of him coiled with strength. The cold still clung to him, a visible aura that shimmered in the warm air of the room. She scrambled back against the headboard, pulling the furs up to her chin. "Your Majesty." Her voice was a raw croak. He stopped several feet from the bed, his silver eyes watching her every move. He did not smile. His face remained a harsh, beautiful mask. "You are inhaling smoke. The healers have given you a poultice. It will ease the burning." His tone was flat, factual. "Lyra?" she asked, the name a painful rasp. "The little girl?" "She is well, unharmed." Relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. She sagged against the pillows. "Thank you." He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire. Ilara's mind raced. Why was she here? What did he mean, future queen? It had to be a mistake. A fever dream brought on by the smoke. "Why am I here?" she finally whispered, daring to meet his gaze. You are in my fortress, in the Northern Crown. He stated it as a simple fact. But why? She clutched the furs tighter. I am. I am nothing. I am soulless. She held up her branded hand as proof, the gesture both an explanation and an apology. His eyes fixed on the mark. A flicker of something unreadable passed through them. Anger? Pain? It was gone before she could name it. That brand is a lie, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Her heart hammered. A lie? For her entire life, it had been the only truth she knew. It was the reason for every blow, every sneer, every hungry night. I don't understand. You will, he said, and it was not a promise of comfort. It was a statement of fact. He moved to a table where a pitcher and goblet sat. Frost bloomed on the silver pitcher as he touched it. He poured water, the liquid turning cloudy with ice crystals, and brought it to her. She hesitated, looking at the cup, then at him. He simply waited, his patience as vast and cold as his kingdom. Trembling, she reached out, her fingers brushing his. The cold was shocking. It was not the biting chill of winter, but a dead, absolute cold that felt like it leached the very life from her. She gasped and pulled her hand back. His expression tightened. He set the goblet on the bedside table. This is why you are here. He held up his own hand. The skin was pale, laced with veins that seemed almost blue. My bloodline is cursed. We are born with an affinity for winter, for ice. It gives us great power, but it comes at a cost. He paused, his silver gaze boring into her. We cannot feel warmth. We cannot know love. To do so, it is a poison. It accelerates the cold, consumes us, and eventually, it freezes our hearts until they stop. Alara stared at him, horrified. A king who could be killed by love. It was a tragedy from a children's story. For centuries, my line has ruled without mates, without queens, he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. It is a lonely existence, but a necessary one. Then why? Me? The question was barely audible. Because when I touched you, he said, his voice dropping lower, in the fire, something happened. I felt a spark. Not warmth. Not yet. But a possibility of it. An answer to the cold. She remembered it too. The thrumming energy between them. The legends of my ancestors speak of a counterbalance. A fire to my ice. A soul so bright it could burn away the curse. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something beyond the cold. A desperate, ancient longing. They call it the sun soul. Sun soul. The name was as foreign as queen. She looked at her scarred hands, her thin frame. She was a scullery maid, a branded outcast, not a magical savior from a legend. That cannot be me, she said, shaking her head. You are mistaken, Your Majesty. I have no power. I am empty. Are you? He asked softly. He took a step closer. You ran into a burning building for a child that was not yours. You shielded her with your body. That is not the act of an empty soul, Alara. He knew her name. The sound of it on his lips sent a strange shiver through her, a tremor that had nothing to do with fear. This is a mistake, she insisted, her voice trembling. Lord Valerius himself branded me. He saw the emptiness in me. Valerius, Kale repeated, the name turning to ice in his mouth. He is my advisor for the outer territories. He was my father's man. He has been telling me for years that the Sun Soul legend was a myth, that no such power existed in our people. A cold dread settled in Alara's stomach. Valerius, the man who hated her for no reason, who had overseen her branding. I will establish an arrangement, Kale declared, his tone shifting back to that of a king. You will remain here, in this room. You will be my ward, under my protection. No one will harm you. In return, you will, Allow me to be near you. We will see if the legends are true. A ward. It was a sterile, safe word. A boundary. This was not about love or affection. It was an experiment. She was a potential cure. A tool. It should have felt insulting. Degrading. But after a lifetime of being treated as less than dirt, being seen as a tool by a king felt like a promotion. I will not touch you, he stated, his eyes like silver chips. The risk is too great, for both of us. But your presence, it may be enough. She nodded, unable to speak. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, but for the first time in her life, the cage was warm. Do we have an agreement? He asked. Yes, Your Majesty, she whispered. He gave another of his curt nods and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Ilara. She looked up. Do not believe the lies that have been carved into your skin, he said, his voice a low command. Believe what I tell you. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the fire, a goblet of icy water, and the impossible, terrifying weight of a king's hope. The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Ilara remained in her chambers, a luxurious prison of soft furs and warm fires. Servants brought her meals on silver trays, their faces carefully blank, their hands quick to retreat as if she might burn them. They did not speak to her, but their fear was gone, replaced by a wary, confused respect. She was the king's ward. Kale kept his word. He did not touch her, but he visited. Every evening, as dusk painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of purple and rose, he would appear. He would stand across the room, near the cold stone of the far wall, a silent, imposing figure. Sometimes he brought her things, a book of old legends, its pages brittle with age, a plate of sweet cakes from the kitchens, a single perfect white rose he had somehow procured in the dead of winter, its petals edged with a delicate frost that never melted. These small gestures shattered her. No one had ever given her a gift. Each one was a tiny, baffling crack in the icy facade he presented to the world. They would talk. Or rather, she would talk, and he would listen. At first, her words were hesitant, choked with a lifetime of being told her voice did not matter. But his silence was not empty. It was attentive. He watched her with that unnerving, silver-eyed intensity, and she found herself wanting to fill the quiet space between them. She told him about her life in the village, though she carefully omitted the worst of the cruelty. She spoke of Lyra, of the way the forest looked after a fresh snowfall, of the simple pleasure of a warm loaf of bread. He, in turn, spoke of his kingdom, of the politics of the wolf packs, of the endless responsibility that rested on his shoulders. He never spoke of himself, of his feelings or his past. He was as vast and unknowable as the night sky. One evening she found the courage to ask, "What does it feel like? The curse?" He was standing by the window, looking out at the endless expanse of white. "It is a constant cold," he said, his voice low. "A hollowness. Imagine never feeling the sun on your skin, never feeling the warmth of a fire in your blood. It is an absence, and it grows worse with each passing year." She looked at the roaring fire in the hearth, then back at him. He stood so far from it, as if its heat were an offense. "And being near me, does it help?" He turned his head, his gaze meeting hers across the room. "The absence feels less absolute when you are here." Her heart did a strange, painful flip. It was the most intimate thing he had ever said. As the days bled into weeks, she began to notice things. She saw the way his hands, always bare within the fortress, left faint traces of frost on anything he touched for more than a moment. The silver goblet by her bed was perpetually beaded with condensation. She saw the exhaustion that sometimes shadowed his sharp features, a weariness that went beyond the duties of a king. and she started to feel something new within herself. It began as a warmth in the palms of her hands whenever he was in the room, a pleasant, tingling heat that felt like holding a warm stone. It was a secret comfort, a small rebellion against the cold that defined him. One night, Lord Valerius requested an audience with the king. Alara was not supposed to be there, but the great hall was adjacent to her chambers, and the heavy doors had been left slightly ajar. She found herself drawn to the sliver of light, her hand resting on the cold iron of the door. "She is a danger, Your Majesty." Valerius's voice was sharp with a familiar, righteous fury. "You keep this soulless thing in your fortress. You give her chambers fit for a noble lady," the council whispers. The packs grow restless. They say you have been bewitched. "The council can take their concerns to my dungeons." Kale's voice was flat, bored, but laced with a threat as sharp as a shard of ice. "She is my ward. My word is law. A law that defies all tradition. She bears the brand. I put it there myself, by the old rights. I saw the emptiness in her, the void that invites chaos. Her presence here is a mockery. It is poison." Alara flinched, her hand flying to the mark on her own. Poison. The word echoed Kale's description of his curse. "You overstep, Valerius." Kale's voice dropped, and the temperature in the hall seemed to plummet with it. Alara could feel the chill even through the door. "I am only thinking of you, of the kingdom," Valerius protested. "This curse, it can be managed. Isolation has always been the key. But to invite a potential catalyst into your very home, it is madness. What if proximity to her, this supposed sun soul, does not heal you but hastens the end? What if she is the poison the legends speak of?" A terrible silence followed. Alara held her breath, her ear pressed to the crack in the doors. "Leave me," Kyle said finally. The two words were a death sentence. Valerius scurried away and Alara retreated into her room, her heart pounding. When Kyle entered her chambers later, he looked more drawn than she had ever seen him. The air around him was palpably colder. He did not speak, simply moved to his usual spot by the window. She couldn't bear it. The distance, the rules, the fear that coiled in her gut from Valerius's words. "He's wrong," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Kale turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Lord Valerius, he is wrong about me." She took a hesitant step away from the fire, toward him. It was the first time she had ever closed the distance between them. "I am not empty, and I am not poison." He watched her approach, his body rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Stay back, Alara." It was a warning, a plea. She ignored it. She stopped just an arm's length from him. The cold rolling off him was intense, a physical force. It stole the breath from her lungs and raised goosebumps on her arms. But beneath it, she could feel the tingling heat in her own palms growing stronger, more insistent. "I don't believe you are meant to be alone," she said softly, her eyes locked on his. "I don't believe love is a poison. I think it's the cure, and someone lied to you." His control finally fractured. A raw, agonized sound escaped his lips. "You don't understand. You feel that? The cold? It is worse tonight. Sharper. Since you've been here, the moments of relief are real, but the backlash, it is more severe each time. Valerius might be right. You might be killing me." Her blood ran cold. The warmth in her hands vanished, replaced by a sickening dread. Was it true? Was her presence a slow-acting venom? "No," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Impulsively, desperately, she reached out. She didn't mean to touch him. She only meant to show him, to prove something. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand. It was like plunging her arm into a frozen lake. The cold was a violent shock, a pain that shot up to her shoulder. But she didn't pull away. And then it happened. For a split second where her skin met his, the cold vanished. In its place, a jolt of pure, searing heat. It was not her warmth. It was his. A spark of the furnace that had been buried under centuries of ice. Kyle gasped, his eyes widening in shock and pain. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. He stared at his own skin, then at her, his face a mask of terror. What was that? He breathed. He had felt it. For the first time in his life, he had felt true warmth. And it terrified him. "It didn't hurt," she said, her own voice trembling with awe. She looked at her hand, then at his. It wasn't poison. "Get back," he commanded, his voice shaking with a raw emotion she had never heard from him before. Fear. He was utterly terrified. "Go. Back to the fire." He stumbled back, away from her, until his back hit the cold stone of the wall. He was breathing heavily, his silver eyes wild. The frost on the wall around him spread thick and fast, a spiderweb of ice crystallizing from his aura of power. He had felt warmth. And now the curse was retaliating. Valerius was right. She was killing him. The terror in his eyes was a blade in her heart. He was not afraid of her, but of what she represented. A hope so dangerous it was indistinguishable from a death sentence. From that night on, everything changed. The fragile truce between them was broken. Kale stopped visiting her chambers. The books, the small gifts, the quiet conversations, they all ceased. The silence that returned was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the ghost of a warmth he had felt for a single, terrifying second. Alara was more alone than ever. She had a warm room and fine food, but she was adrift in a sea of confused glances and fearful whispers from the castle staff. She saw the healers hurrying to the king's wing more and more often. She heard the hushed rumors of his worsening condition. The cold was claiming him. She would press her hands against the cold stone of her room, trying to summon the warmth she had felt, but it was gone, dormant. It only seemed to answer to him. Lord Valerius, however, seemed to be thriving. He walked the halls with a renewed swagger, his narrow face pinched with concern that did not reach his slate-gray eyes. He spoke loudly of the king's failing health, of the dark magic that had taken root in the fortress. He never named Alara, but everyone knew who he meant. She was the blight, the poison, the soulless girl who was killing their king with her very presence. The self-doubt she had carried her whole life returned with a vengeance. Kale had been wrong. Valerius had been right all along. She was empty, a vessel for chaos. She had taken the one person who had shown her a flicker of kindness, and she had destroyed him. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. One afternoon, the doors to her chamber burst open. It was not a gentle servant with a food tray. It was two of the castle guards, their faces grim. Valerius stood behind them, his expression one of cold triumph. "Alara of the Northern Fang," he intoned, his voice ringing with false authority. "By order of the King's Council, you are under arrest for the crime of witchcraft and attempted regicide." Her blood turned to ice. "No, I did nothing." "Your presence is a poison," Valerius sneered, finally dropping the pretense. "You have amplified the curse just as I predicted. The king is dying, and you are the cause. We will have a trial, and you will be cleansed, for the good of the kingdom." The guards seized her arms. Their touch was rough, unforgiving. They did not see the king's ward. They saw a witch. She looked past them, down the hall toward the king's wing, a desperate, silent plea. But the doors remained closed. He was not coming for her. He couldn't. He was dying because of her. They dragged her from her warm prison, down winding stone staircases into the bowels of the fortress. The air grew cold and damp, the familiar chill of her old life returning to claim her. They threw her into a lightless cell, the sound of the heavy iron door slamming shut echoing the finality of her fate. She slid down the rough wall to the filthy floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. The brand on her hand seemed to throb with a dull, mocking ache. Soulless. She had dared to hope. She had dared to believe she could be something more. A sun soul. A queen. And that hope had turned to poison, just as Valerius had said. She sat in the darkness, the despair a cold heavier than any curse. Kale was dying, and it was all her fault. The crisis came faster than she could have imagined. She spent 2 days in the suffocating dark of the dungeon, fed only stale bread and brackish water. The guards who brought it refused to look at her, sliding the tray through a slot in the door as if she were a rabid animal. Her despair was a living thing, a cold, heavy creature curled in her gut. She had killed him. She had taken his flicker of hope and fanned it into a fatal flame. The guilt was so immense, she could barely breathe. She wished Valerius would just get it over with, execute her, and end this agony. On the 3rd day, the door creaked open. Guards pulled her to her feet, her muscles stiff and aching. "It is time," one of them grunted. "The trial." It was not a trial. It was a sentencing. She knew it. Everyone knew it. They marched her up from the dungeons and into the great hall. The same hall where she had once hidden in the shadows, watching the king. Now she was the center of attention. The hall was packed. Every council member, every high-ranking pack member, every servant who could slip away from their duties was there. Their faces were a sea of fear, anger, and morbid curiosity. They stared at her, the witch, the soulless blight who had brought their Alpha King to his knees. A makeshift platform had been erected in the center of the room. They forced her onto it, leaving her standing alone, exposed. Lord Valerius stood before the throne, which sat ominously empty. He held a scroll in his hand, his face alight with a feverish holy zeal. "We are gathered here today, due to a great tragedy," he began, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "Our Alpha King, Kale, lies on his deathbed, consumed by the frost of his ancient curse." A murmur of grief and fear swept through the crowd. For centuries, he has kept it at bay through strength and solitude, but a darkness crept into our midst. He pointed a dramatic, trembling finger at Alara. "This girl, branded soulless by the old rites, a vessel for chaos. She bewitched our king, wormed her way into his confidence, and with her unnatural presence, she has turned his curse into a fatal poison." "No," Alara whispered, the word lost in the vastness of the hall. It was a lie, a twisted version of the truth. But how could she explain? How could she make them understand about sunsouls and sparks of warmth? They would only see it as more witchcraft. "She has confessed to her crime," Valerius lied boldly. "She admitted her touch was a catalyst. I propose a sentence of cleansing by fire. Let us burn the blight from our halls and pray it is not too late for our king." A roar of approval went up from the crowd. They were terrified. They needed someone to blame, and she was the perfect target. Alara's legs trembled. She looked out at the sea of hateful faces, and for the first time, she felt a flicker not of fear, but of anger. They knew nothing. They saw a brand and a scapegoat. Not the man who brought her books, not the king who carried the weight of a frozen world on his shoulders. As Valerius raised his hand to signal the guards, a low growl rumbled through the hall. It did not come from the crowd. It came from the edges of the room. 4 massive wolves, their fur the color of shadow and storm, stepped out from behind the pillars. They were Kale's personal guard, the alphas of his own pack, rarely seen out of their human forms within the fortress. Panic rippled through the onlookers. The wolves ignored them. Their eyes, glowing with a faint amber light, were fixed on Alara. Valerius froze. "What is the meaning of this? Control your beasts!" He snapped at their handlers, who stood by, pale and confused. The wolves did not attack. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. They walked toward the platform, their claws clicking softly on the stone floor. The crowd parted before them like water. They circled the platform where she stood. They were not circling to attack. They sat. One by one, they took up positions around her, facing outward, their bodies forming a living, breathing wall between her and the rest of the world. Their growls subsided into a low, protective rumble. They were guarding her. A gasp went through the hall. Ilara stared down at the massive creatures, her heart hammering. They were Kale's most loyal. They answered to no one but him. Through the mate bond, through the tangled mess of curses and legends, they recognized her, their Luna, their queen. Valerius's face contorted with pure, undiluted rage. His carefully orchestrated trial was falling apart. Traitors! They are bewitched! All of them! Guards, seize her! Now! The castle guards hesitated, their spears lowered. They would not move against the king's own wolves. The advisor's sanity finally snapped. His eyes wild, he drew a ceremonial blade from the sheath at his belt. "If you will not cleanse this filth, I will do it myself." He lunged toward the platform, his face a mask of madness. The wolves snarled, rising to their paws, but he was too fast. He leaped onto the platform, the blade raised high, its polished surface reflecting the terrified faces of the crowd. Time seemed to slow. Ilara saw the blade begin its descent. She thought of Kale, lying frozen and alone. She thought of these wolves, who defied their own counsel to protect her. She thought of the lie branded on her skin and the lifetime of worthlessness it had brought her. And the anger, the grief, the fierce, protective love she felt for the dying king. It all coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure inside her chest. No, the word was not spoken. It was a feeling, a command, a refusal. "My love will not be your poison." She raised her hand, the branded one. A wave of heat so intense it was visible erupted from her. It was not the gentle tingling of before. It was a furnace, a supernova. Light, pure and golden as the heart of the sun, burst from her palm. The brand on her hand glowed, the black, scarred lines turning to molten gold before dissolving into nothing, leaving smooth, unblemished skin behind. In its place, a new mark bloomed, a swirling sigil of a sunburst. The wave of power slammed into Valerius. The blade in his hand glowed cherry red, then white-hot, melting into a stream of liquid metal that spattered harmlessly on the stones. He screamed, not in pain but in terror, and was thrown backward off the platform, landing in a heap at the foot of the empty throne. The entire hall was silent, stunned. They stared at her, at the girl who was no longer a girl. She stood bathed in a soft golden light, her hand raised, her eyes blazing with an inner fire. The cold of the great hall had vanished, replaced by a sudden, impossible warmth. She was not empty. She was full. She lowered her hand, the light receding but not disappearing, sinking back into her skin, leaving her glowing from within. She looked at the wolves. One of them let out a soft whine and bowed its head. She had no time for the stunned crowd or the groaning advisor. There was only one thing that mattered: Kyle. Without a word, she stepped off the platform and ran. The crowd parted for her, their hatred and fear replaced by awe and confusion. She ran through the halls of the fortress, her bare feet silent on the stone, the warmth that now lived in her guiding her way. She ran toward the king's wing, toward the cold, toward the man she was going to save. She didn't need to ask for directions. A deep, instinctual pull guided her, a compass needle pointing toward her opposite. The closer she got to his chambers, the colder the air became. Frost coated the walls in intricate, desperate patterns. The guards outside his door were huddled in thick furs, their breath pluming in the air. but they stepped aside for her without question, their eyes wide with disbelief. She pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. The room was a tomb of ice. Everything was covered in a thick layer of frost: the furniture, the tapestries, the floor. The roaring fire, she remembered, was long dead, its hearth a gaping maw of frozen ash. And in the center of the room, on the massive bed, lay Kale. He was encased in a thin, translucent shell of ice, like a king preserved in crystal. His skin was pale blue, his black hair stark against the rime. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful in a way it had never been in life. He was perfectly still, too still. A cry of pure anguish tore from her throat. She rushed to his side, her boots crunching on the frozen floor. The cold was absolute, a physical blow that should have stopped her heart. But the fire inside her, newly awakened, rose to meet it, a shield of warmth against the encroaching death. "Kale," she whispered, her voice breaking. She reached out a trembling hand, hesitating just above the ice covering his chest. Was this her fault? Had her burgeoning power been the final push that sent him over the edge? No. She refused to believe it. This was not her fault. This was the curse. And she was the cure. She pressed her hands flat against the ice over his heart. The contact was agony, a war of fundamental forces, searing fire against absolute zero. A scream was ripped from her lungs as the cold tried to extinguish her, to leach the very fire from her soul, but she held on. "You will not die," she gritted out, tears streaming down her face and freezing on her cheeks. "You will not leave me." She poured everything she was into her touch, all the pain of her past, all the hope for her future, all the fierce, impossible love she felt for this frozen king. The golden light flared around her, no longer soft but a raging inferno. The sunburst on her hand burned like a brand of pure creation. The ice sizzled, it cracked, steam filled the air, thick and white. The cold fought back, a desperate, ancient thing, trying to reclaim its vessel. But it was a dying power, a power born of loneliness and despair. It could not stand against a power born of love and sacrifice. "I love you," she sobbed, the words she had never dared to think now her only weapon. "Do you hear me? I love you, Kale." With a sound like a glacier calving, the ice shell shattered. It exploded outward, sublimating into a dense fog that filled the room. Kale gasped, a deep, shuddering, desperate gasp of a man who had not truly breathed in centuries. His eyes flew open. They were still silver, but the cold, flat light was gone. They were clear, bright, and fixed on her face. The cold in the room vanished. Not just receded, but vanished entirely, replaced by the gentle, neutral air of a normal room. Alara collapsed forward, her strength gone, her head landing on his chest. She felt it. Under her cheek, through the fabric of his tunic. A heartbeat, strong, steady, and warm. His skin was warm. A hand came up, no longer cold as death, and tangled in her hair. It was hesitant, as if relearning a forgotten motion. "Alara," he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. She lifted her head, her vision blurry with tears. He was looking at her, truly looking at her, and his face was stripped bare of its icy mask. She saw wonder. She saw disbelief. She saw a love so profound it mirrored her own. "You," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek. "It was always you." "The curse," she choked out. "Is it?" "It's gone," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile, and it was like watching the sun rise after a lifetime of winter. "The cold. It's gone. I can feel, Ilara, I can feel the warmth of your skin." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in an embrace that was both powerful and exquisitely gentle. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. I thought I was dead. I felt the ice taking my heart, and then I heard you. She clung to him, weeping with relief. I thought I had killed you. No, he murmured against her temple. You saved me. You saved me from a prison 1,000 years old. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Your hand. He took her hand, the one that had once been branded, and turned it over. He traced the glowing sunburst symbol with his finger. The sun soul. It was not a question. It was a confirmation. A reverence. Does it hurt? He asked, his voice soft, his eyes searching hers. She looked from her hand to his face, to the love shining there, and a real, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. Not anymore. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a king claiming his queen. It was a man, saved and whole, kissing the woman who was his other half. It was warmth and life, and a promise of 1,000 sunrises to come. It was the end of winter. Weeks later, the northern crown was a transformed place. The pervasive chill that had always clung to the stones of the fortress was gone, replaced by a comfortable, lived-in warmth. Fires burned brightly in the hearths, not just for heat, but for cheer. The servants and guards, once grim and silent, now had a lightness to their steps. Their king was saved. Their queen had been revealed. Lord Valerius was in the deepest cell of the dungeons he had once sent Alara to. During his interrogation, the truth had finally come out. Generations ago, his family had been tasked with watching for the emergence of the Sun Soul, a power they feared would disrupt the Alpha King's icy control. The soulless brand was their invention, a way to mark and suppress any child who showed a flicker of the forbidden fire magic, convincing the world and the children themselves that they were empty. Alara had simply been the one with the strongest potential they had seen in centuries. His hatred for her had not been random. It had been a calculated effort to extinguish a power he was sworn to destroy. Alara sat beside Kale on a plush sofa before the great hearth in his private study. It was a room she had never been in before, filled with maps and scrolls, but he had brought her here this morning, wanting to share this part of his life with her. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arms securely around her. His warmth was a constant, miraculous presence. She held up her hand, watching the faint golden light of the sunburst sigil pulse in time with her heartbeat. I still can't believe it, she murmured. For so long, I thought this hand was a symbol of my worthlessness. Kale took her hand in his fingers lacing with hers. His touch was a simple comfort she would never take for granted. It was always a symbol of your power, Alara. Valerius just taught you to read it wrong. He feared you because he knew what you were. He knew you were my salvation. She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke that was uniquely his. And you? Did you know? He was quiet for a moment. I knew I was looking for something, a counterpoint to the silence inside me. The moment I saw you, even covered in soot and fear, I felt a pull, like a compass finding its north. My soul knew you, even when my mind was still lost in the cold. A comfortable silence settled between them. This was her new life. Quiet moments of peace, the freedom to speak her mind, the constant, steady presence of a man who saw her not as a tool or a legend, but as his equal. His love. Later that day, he took her to the high battlements of the fortress. Below, the training grounds were bustling with activity. Wolves in their human forms sparred, their shouts and laughter carrying on the crisp winter air. Among them, she saw the 4 massive wolves of his personal guard, watching the proceedings with proud amber eyes. When they saw her, their heads dipped in a gesture of respect. Her wolves, her pack. They are yours to command now, as well as mine, Kale said, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. The pack knows you. They see the sun in you. She looked out over the vast snow-covered kingdom stretching to the horizon. It was still a world of ice and snow, but it no longer looked merciless to her. It was beautiful. It was her home. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted, her voice small against the vastness. "Being a queen." He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. His silver eyes were full of a warmth that now rivaled her own. "You were always a queen, Alara. You just had a kingdom of one, locked away inside you. Now you have a kingdom to share." He smiled. "And a king who needs you to help him remember how to feel the sun." She smiled back, a true radiant smile that made the sunburst on her hand glow brighter. "I think I can manage that." He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss full of promises for the future. A future of warmth, of life, of a love that had burned away a curse and forged a new world from the ashes of the old. She was not the soulless girl anymore. She was the Sun Soul Queen, and her reign, beside her Alpha King, was just beginning. The winter had been long, but spring had finally come to the heart of the North.